Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that hidden in the frozen wilderness of northern Manitoba lies a single thread of steel that could determine the balance of power in North America for the next century? And what if this seemingly insignificant railway line, dismissed by most observers as a relic of Canada's colonial past, is actually the most strategically important piece of transportation infrastructure in the Western Hemisphere? For generations, we have been told that Canada's future lies in our relationship with the United States. We built our highways south, we piped our oil south, and we oriented our entire economy around serving American markets. But what if I told you that this dependence was never a necessity? It was a choice, and one that a visionary group of Indigenous leaders in northern communities is now systematically undoing through the most audacious infrastructure strategy in Canadian history. Today, we're going to explore how the Hudson Bay Railway, on that forgotten line of steel running from Winnipeg to the shores of the Arctic Ocean, has become Canada's secret weapon against American economic dominance. More importantly, we'll examine how this railway is positioned to fundamentally reshape global trade patterns and establish Canada as an independent player on the world stage. To understand why this railway matters, we must first understand the magnitude of the strategic vulnerability it solves. For over a century, Canada has been economically integrated with the United States to a degree that would be considered dangerous if we were talking about any other foreign nation. Nearly 75% of our exports flow south across the world's longest undefended border. Our supply chains are so intertwined with American operations that a disruption in cross-border trade can shut down entire industries within hours. This integration was sold to us as strength, the benefits of being joined to the world's largest economy. But integration and dependence are different things, and over the decades, what began as mutually beneficial cooperation has evolved into something resembling colonial extraction. We ship raw materials south and buy back finished products at a premium. The recent trade disputes have exposed how fragile this relationship has become. When the United States imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum under national security justification, it wasn't just an economic attack. It was a declaration that America views Canada as a potential threat rather than a trusted ally. But while politicians in Ottawa scrambled to manage the diplomatic fallout, a quiet revolution was taking place in the Canadian North that would prove far more significant than any trade negotiation. The Hudson Bay Railway was being transformed from a marginal branch line into what could become the most important trade corridor in the Arctic. Before we dive deeper into the strategic implications of this transformation, if you're finding this analysis of Canada's hidden infrastructure advantages valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue to produce detailed geopolitical analysis like this, and it ensures that more Canadians learn about the strategic assets we possess but rarely discuss. The Hudson Bay Railway doesn't look like much on a map. A thin line running nearly 1,000 kilometers from Winnipeg through challenging terrain to the remote port of Churchill on Hudson Bay. For most of its existence, this railway has been viewed as a costly necessity to serve isolated northern communities, requiring government subsidies to remain operational. But geography is destiny, and the Hudson Bay Railway occupies one of the most strategically valuable positions on the planet. It is the only year-round land connection between the North American heartland and deepwater Arctic shipping routes. The mathematics of Arctic shipping are revolutionary. A container ship traveling from Hamburg to Tokyo via traditional southern routes covers approximately 21,000 kilometers and requires 24 to 28 days. The same journey via Arctic routes covers just 14,000 kilometers and can be completed in 16-18 days during the ice-free season. The cost savings are enormous. A large container ship burns roughly 250 tons of fuel daily at approximately $150,000. Saving 8 to 12 days of sailing time translates to fuel savings of $1.2 to $1.8 million per voyage. Total savings can exceed $3 million per voyage when including crew wages, insurance costs, and port fees. Multiply these savings across thousands of ships that travel between Europe and Asia annually, and Arctic shipping routes represent potential cost reductions worth tens of billions to the global economy. This is why shipping companies are investing heavily in ice-capable vessels and Arctic route planning. But here's the crucial point. Arctic shipping routes are only valuable if they can connect to land-based transportation networks. The Hudson Bay Railway provides the only year-round land connection between deep-water Arctic shipping and the continental rail grid serving North America as agricultural and industrial heartland. This creates intermodal efficiency, seamless cargo transfer between transportation modes to optimize cost, speed, and reliability. Grain from Saskatchewan can reach European markets faster and cheaper via Churchill than through any other route. Goods from Europe can reach the American Midwest via the Hudson Bay Railway without passing through American ports. The strategic implications are staggering. For the first time since Confederation, Canada possesses infrastructure to bypass the United States entirely in trade relationships with Europe and Asia. We are no longer dependent on American goodwill to reach global markets. We have our own door to the world. But the Hudson Bay Railway faces engineering challenges that make it one of the most difficult transportation projects to maintain anywhere in the world. The line crosses hundreds of kilometers of peat bogs, permafrost, and wetlands that shift with seasonal temperature changes. Traditional railway construction techniques don't work. The ground literally moves underneath tracks as it freezes and thaws. The solution required innovations now being studied by engineers worldwide. Thermal siphons, devices that extract heat from the ground to keep permafrost frozen, are installed at regular intervals to prevent track movement. Special drainage systems manage enormous amounts of water created when permafrost melts during warm summers. Winter temperatures along the route can drop below 40 degrees C, creating conditions that challenge even the most robust equipment designed for extreme cold operation. The port facilities at Churchill must operate in conditions that would shut down most other ports in the world. Icebreaking equipment is necessary for much of the year to keep shipping lanes open. Cargo handling systems must function reliably in extreme cold, and storage facilities must protect goods from temperature swings of over 60 degrees C between summer and winter extremes. These engineering challenges explain why the Hudson Bay Railway has struggled financially for most of its existence. The combination of harsh operating conditions, seasonal usage patterns, and limited cargo volumes made it nearly impossible to operate profitably using traditional business models focused on short-term returns and conventional operational approaches. The breakthrough came in 2018 when the Arctic Gateway Group purchased the railway and port facilities. This wasn't a typical corporate acquisition. It represented one of the most innovative approaches to infrastructure ownership in modern history. The Arctic Gateway Group consists of 29 First Nations communities and 12 northern Manitoba municipalities. For the first time in Canadian history, Indigenous communities collectively own and operate major transportation infrastructure that serves national and international trade. The Indigenous communities have traditional knowledge of the local environment that proves invaluable for maintenance and operations in extreme conditions. They provide a stable workforce in a region where labor recruitment has always been challenging. Most importantly, they have long-term perspectives that allow for patient investment rather than demands for immediate returns. This stability has attracted significant investment in upgrading the railway's capacity. New locomotives designed for Arctic conditions have been purchased. Track improvements are being implemented using the latest cold weather engineering techniques. Port facilities at Churchill are being expanded to handle larger ships and higher cargo volumes. The timing of these investments coincides perfectly with the opening of Arctic shipping routes due to climate change. Hudson Bay is experiencing rapid ice loss. The shipping season, historically limited to July through October, now extends from June through November and could become year-round within the next decade. International shipping companies are taking serious notice of these developments. Nunavut Sea Link and Supply, which operates specialized vessels in Arctic waters, has signed long-term agreements to use Churchill as a hub for Arctic operations and cargo consolidation. Major international shipping lines are conducting detailed feasibility studies for regular container service between Churchill and European ports. The grain industry has been among the first to recognize Churchill's transformational potential for Canadian agriculture. Prairie farmers have long been frustrated by the limited capacity and high costs of traditional grain shipping routes through Vancouver and Thunder Bay. These established routes face chronic capacity constraints during harvest season and require expensive rail transportation across the Rocky Mountains or around the Great Lakes. Churchill offers a more direct route to European markets for grain grown in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Rail transportation from Saskatchewan wheat fields to Churchill is roughly 400 kilometers shorter than the route to Vancouver, saving significant transportation costs and reducing the environmental impact of long-distance rail transport. More importantly, ships loading grain at Churchill can reach major European ports 8 to 10 days faster than vessels departing from traditional East or West Coast facilities. The economics of grain shipping through Churchill are becoming increasingly attractive as global competition intensifies. A typical grain shipment from Saskatchewan to Germany costs approximately $85.95 per ton, using traditional routes through Vancouver or Thunder Bay, including rail transportation, port handling, and ocean freight. The same shipment via Churchill is projected to cost $75 per ton, providing savings of $20 or more per ton. For large grain vessels carrying 50,000 to 60,000 tons, this represents savings of over $1 million per shipment. In an industry where margins are often razor-thin and global competition is fierce, these transportation cost savings can determine whether Canadian grain remains competitive in international markets or loses market share to competitors with lower transportation costs. The Port of Churchill is being systematically upgraded to handle these increased grain volumes in larger vessels. New grain loading facilities designed for Arctic conditions can accommodate Panamax-class vessels, ships up to 229 meters long capable of carrying up to 80,000 tons of cargo. These upgrades will increase Churchill's grain handling capacity from approximately 500,000 tons annually to over 2 million tons within the next 5 years. But grain represents just the beginning of Churchill's potential as an Arctic gateway. The real economic prize lies in container traffic and general cargo that could flow through Churchill as Arctic routes become more established and reliable. Container shipping generates much higher revenues per ton than bulk commodities like grain, and the potential volumes could be enormous if even a small fraction of Asia-Europe trade shifts to Arctic routes. Consider the economics of container shipping. A container ship traveling from Hamburg to Tokyo via the Suez Canal generates approximately $18,000 to $22,000 in revenue per container, depending on cargo type and market conditions. The same container shipped via Arctic routes could command premium pricing due to faster delivery times and reduced risk of canal closures or piracy, potentially earning $25,000, $30,000 per container. If Churchill captured just 1% of the container traffic between Europe and Asia, approximately 250,000 containers annually based on current trade volumes, it would generate over $6 billion in economic activity. The Hudson Bay Railway would earn substantial revenues from transporting these containers to and from inland destinations throughout North America. The infrastructure required to handle container traffic is being developed with the same systematic approach that characterizes the grain facility upgrades. Container cranes designed for reliable cold weather operation are being installed at Churchill Port. Rail yards are being expanded to handle longer container trains that can transport hundreds of containers per trip. Warehouse and distribution facilities are being constructed to provide temporary storage and cargo consolidation services. The Canadian government has recognized the strategic importance of the Hudson Bay Railway and is providing substantial financial support for infrastructure development through multiple programs. The National Trade Corridors Fund has allocated over $147 million specifically for Hudson Bay Railway and Churchill Port improvements. Additional funding is being provided through regional development programs, Indigenous economic development initiatives, and Arctic sovereignty investments. This government support reflects growing recognition that the Hudson Bay Railway could become a major national asset, comparable in strategic importance to the St. Lawrence Seaway or the Trans-Canada Highway. Unlike these other major infrastructure projects, however, the railway is being developed through genuine partnership between government and Indigenous communities, rather than traditional top-down government ownership and operation. The international implications of Churchill's development as an Arctic gateway extend far beyond Canada as borders and could fundamentally alter global trade patterns. As Arctic shipping routes become more commercially viable and reliable, they have the potential to shift economic power toward northern countries that control Arctic access points and away from nations that control traditional choke points. Russia has been aggressively developing its northern sea route along the Siberian coast, investing billions in ice-breaking ships, port facilities, and navigational infrastructure. The Russian route offers the shortest path between Europe and Asia for many cargo flows, but it's subject to Russian government control and the geopolitical risks associated with depending on Russian infrastructure during a period of international sanctions and military conflict. China, despite having no Arctic coastline of its own, has declared itself a near Arctic state and is investing heavily in Arctic shipping capabilities and infrastructure development. Chinese companies are building ice-capable container ships and establishing partnerships with Arctic nations to gain access to northern shipping routes that could reduce their dependence on traditional maritime choke points. The United States has been slower to recognize the strategic importance of Arctic shipping, partly because American Arctic territories and Alaska are less well positioned to serve the most valuable Asia-Europe trade routes. This gives Canada a significant first-mover advantage in developing Arctic trade infrastructure that serves the most lucrative shipping lanes. European shipping companies and port authorities are actively seeking reliable Arctic route options that don't depend on Russian cooperation or Chinese control of key infrastructure. Churchill, backed by Canadian political stability, Indigenous community stewardship, and democratic governance, represents exactly the kind of reliable long-term partner that European businesses seek for critical supply chain relationships. The Norwegian government has already expressed official interest in establishing a regular shipping service between Norwegian ports and Churchill, creating a direct trade link between Europe and North America that completely bypasses traditional Atlantic choke points and provides Canadian exporters with preferential access to European markets. The environmental considerations around Arctic shipping development are complex and require careful balance between economic opportunities and ecological protection. While shorter shipping routes reduce fuel consumption and emissions per voyage, increased Arctic traffic could potentially accelerate ice melting and disrupt sensitive ecosystems that depend on stable ice cover for wildlife habitat and Indigenous traditional activities. The Indigenous communities that own the Hudson Bay Railway have made environmental stewardship a central component of their development strategy, implementing policies that could serve as models for sustainable Arctic development worldwide. Ship speed restrictions in Hudson Bay protect beluga whale populations that migrate through the area during summer months. Cargo handling procedures are designed to minimize environmental impact on the sensitive tundra ecosystem surrounding Churchill. These environmental protections actually provide competitive advantages for Churchill compared to other potential Arctic ports and shipping routes. International shipping companies increasingly face regulatory requirements and consumer pressure to demonstrate environmental responsibility and sustainable operations. Churchill is indigenous-led environmental stewardship, provides credible third-party assurance that Arctic shipping through Hudson Bay is being managed with appropriate environmental safeguards. The wildlife tourism industry around Churchill, particularly the world-famous polar bear viewing opportunities, generates significant revenue that depends entirely on maintaining healthy Arctic ecosystems and wildlife populations. The indigenous owners have strong economic incentives to ensure that increased shipping traffic does not damage the environmental assets that support this important tourism sector. This balance between industrial development and environmental protection positions Churchill as a compelling model for sustainable Arctic development that other regions could emulate. Rather than choosing between economic opportunity and environmental protection, the indigenous ownership model demonstrates how development can enhance both economic and environmental outcomes when managed with appropriate long-term perspectives. The technological innovations required to operate the Hudson Bay Railway reliably in Arctic conditions are creating intellectual property and engineering expertise that could be exported to other cold climate regions worldwide. Canadian engineering companies are developing specialized equipment, operational techniques, and maintenance protocols for Arctic railway operations that have applications in Siberia, northern Scandinavia, Alaska, and other regions where traditional transportation infrastructure faces similar extreme weather challenges. This technological expertise represents an additional economic opportunity beyond the direct transportation revenues. As Arctic development accelerates globally due to climate change and resource development pressures, Canadian companies with proven experience in Arctic transportation operations could capture significant market share in international Arctic infrastructure development projects. The military and security implications of the Hudson Bay Railway are becoming increasingly important as Arctic regions gain strategic significance in global security calculations. The railway provides the only year-round land-based access route to Canada's Arctic territories, making it crucial for national defense logistics and sovereignty assertion activities. Canadian military officials have identified Churchill as a potentially important logistics hub for Arctic operations and sovereignty patrols. Military supplies and personnel destined for Arctic installations can be transported efficiently via the railway rather than relying exclusively on expensive and weather-dependent air transport that faces significant operational limitations during Arctic winter conditions. The railway also supports Canada's legal claims to Arctic sovereignty by demonstrating active use and economic development of Arctic territories. International law recognizes effective occupation, use, and economic development as important factors in territorial claims and boundary disputes, making the railway a successful operation relevant to Canada's legal position in ongoing disputes over Arctic boundaries and resource rights. Friends, as we look toward the future, the picture becomes remarkably clear. The Hudson Bay Railway represents far more than just an alternative shipping route or a successful Indigenous economic development project. It represents Canada's pathway to genuine economic independence and strategic autonomy in an increasingly unpredictable world. For the first time since Confederation, we possess the infrastructure to engage with global markets on our own terms, without depending on American permission or cooperation. We can ship our goods to Europe and Asia via our own ports, using our own railways, under our own sovereign control. And we can welcome international trade and investment without worrying about American approval or interference. This is what true sovereignty looks like in the 21st century, not just political independence, but economic independence backed by the infrastructure to act independently. The Hudson Bay Railway is Canada's declaration that we are no longer content to be America's resource hinterland. We are building the tools to be masters of our own economic destiny. The transformation is already underway, and the momentum is building with each passing season. What began as a struggling branch line serving a handful of northern communities is becoming a strategic asset that could reshape the balance of power in North America. The steel rails running through the tundra carry more than freight. They carry the future of Canadian independence. Thank you for joining me today in exploring this remarkable story of vision, perseverance, and strategic thinking. If you found this analysis valuable, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth coverage of the geopolitical forces shaping our nation's future. Have you noticed changes in shipping patterns, infrastructure development, or economic activity in northern Canada? Share your observations in the comments below. Your local perspective helps illustrate the scope of this Arctic transformation.